Welcome to Revenge Kitchen. We don't serve dessert, just their comeuppance. I found the email by accident. Victoria had left her computer unlocked during our monthly partner meeting, and when I went to close her presentation, I saw it. A message thread with our biggest competitor about finalizing the transition of Marshall and Ashford's client list. My name was nowhere in those emails. 15 years of partnership, and I was about to become a footnote in my own company's history. The cursor blinked mockingly at me as I read the subject line again. Phase 3 implementation client migration complete by Q1 2025. My hands trembled slightly as I scrolled through the conversation. There it was, in black and white. Months of correspondence between Victoria and Preston Caldwell from Meridian Design Group, discussing the systematic transfer of our most valuable clients. How long has this been going on? The conference room suddenly felt smaller, the glass walls that had once symbolized our transparency now seeming like prison bars. Outside, the Seattle skyline stretched endlessly, the same view that had inspired us when we'd first signed the lease on this space 15 years ago. Back then, Victoria and I had stood here talking about building something lasting, something that would outlive us both. I closed the email thread and stepped back from her computer, my mind racing. The presentation she'd been showing me, the one about restructuring for growth, suddenly made perfect sense. She wasn't talking about growing our company. She was talking about dismantling it. 3 months earlier, I'd been living in blissful ignorance, believing that Marshall and Ashford architecture was exactly what it appeared to be. A thriving partnership built on mutual respect and shared vision. I'd wake up each morning in my craftsman-style home in Queen Anne, spend an hour in my workshop running my hands over wood and steel, materials that never lied, never betrayed, then head to the office energized for another day of creating something beautiful and functional. The first crack in my reality had been so small I'd almost missed it. "Ethan, do you have a moment?" Elena Vasquez had appeared in my office doorway, her usually confident demeanor replaced by something I'd never seen before: uncertainty. As our senior project manager, Elena was the backbone of our operations, the person who could solve any problem with a combination of technical expertise and diplomatic finesse. "Of course, Elena, what's on your mind?" She closed the door behind her, something that immediately put me on alert. Elena was never secretive. "I've been going through the quarterly financials, and there are some irregularities I wanted to run by you." She sat down across from my drafting table, where I'd been reviewing plans for the Belmont Community Center, a project that had consumed my thoughts for weeks. "What kind of irregularities?" Elena opened her tablet and pulled up a spreadsheet. "The Henderson project. According to my records, they paid their final installment 6 weeks ago, but the money never appeared in our operating account." I frowned, setting down my pencil. "Could be a bank delay. You know how slow they can be with large transfers." That's what I thought initially, but I called Henderson Industries directly. They confirmed the payment was processed and cleared weeks ago. Elena's voice carried a weight that made my stomach tighten. "Ethan, the money went to an account I've never seen before. When I asked Victoria about it, she said it was a new escrow account for large payments, something she'd set up for tax purposes." Tax purposes. Victoria had always handled the business development side while I focused on design and project management. I trusted her financial acumen. She had an MBA from Wharton, after all. But something about Elena's tone suggested this wasn't a simple accounting oversight. "Did you ask to see the escrow account details?" "I did. She said she'd get them to me, but that was 2 weeks ago." Elena hesitated. "Ethan, there's more. The Riverside Mall expansion. Remember how excited Victoria was when they decided to go with our revised proposal? According to the client, they never saw a revised proposal. They said Victoria told them we were withdrawing from the project due to scheduling conflicts." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Riverside Mall had been a $2.3 million project, our biggest potential contract of the year. I'd spent weeks perfecting those designs, incorporating sustainable elements that would have set a new standard for commercial architecture in the Pacific Northwest. "That's impossible." I delivered the revised proposal to Victoria personally. She said she was presenting it the next day. Elena's expression confirmed my growing dread. The client award went to Meridian Design Group. Their proposal looked remarkably similar to our initial concepts. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Meridian Design Group, Preston Caldwell's firm. Victoria had mentioned him occasionally, usually in the context of keeping tabs on the competition. She'd even brought him to our company holiday party last year, introducing him as a contact who helps us stay informed about industry trends. How naive I'd been. "Elena, I need you to do something for me, but we need to keep this between us for now." She nodded, her loyalty evident in the way she leaned forward, ready for whatever I needed. Pull together a comprehensive list of every project where money or client communications seem off. Go back 12 months. Be thorough, but be discreet. "Already started," she said, and I wasn't surprised. Elena's attention to detail was one of the reasons our firm had built such a solid reputation. I should have something complete by tomorrow morning. After Elena left, I sat alone in my office, staring at the Belmont Community Center plans without really seeing them. The building was designed to serve as a gathering place for one of Seattle's most diverse neighborhoods, a space where different communities could come together, learn from each other, create something beautiful together. How ironic. I thought about the early days of Marshall and Ashford, when Victoria and I had worked 18-hour days, surviving on coffee and shared dreams. We'd met in graduate school at University of Washington, two ambitious students who discovered they complemented each other perfectly. I brought the creative vision and technical expertise. She brought business savvy and an ability to connect with clients that I'd never possessed. Our first project had been a small residential addition, a sunroom for Victoria's aunt. We'd worked side by side, debating every detail from the angle of the roof to the species of wood for the trim. When the client saw the finished product, she'd cried. "It's perfect," she'd said. "It's exactly what I dreamed of but could never put into words." That had been our mission statement ever since, creating spaces that fulfilled dreams people couldn't articulate. When had Victoria stopped sharing that dream? The next morning brought the answer in the form of Elena's report. She slipped into my office early, before Victoria typically arrived, and set a folder on my desk with the weight of a judge's gavel. "It's worse than I thought," she said simply. The document inside was 15 pages of meticulously organized evidence. 6 major projects in the past year where client communications had been mysteriously altered or redirected. 4 instances where payments had been deposited into accounts I'd never heard of. 3 clients who believed we'd withdrawn from projects that I'd never agreed to abandon. But the most damning evidence was a pattern I hadn't noticed before. Every single discrepancy involved projects that would have required significant collaboration with our design team. These weren't small residential jobs that Victoria could handle independently. These were complex commercial and institutional projects that required my expertise and oversight. She was systematically stealing the work that made our partnership valuable. I was so absorbed in the implications that I didn't hear Victoria enter until she was standing directly in front of my desk. "Morning, Ethan. You're in early today." Her smile was perfectly calibrated, warm but professional, the same expression she'd worn for 15 years of partnership meetings. "Morning, Victoria. Just reviewing some project timelines." I closed Elena's folder casually, but Victoria's eyes tracked the movement. "Anything I should know about?" For a moment, I considered confronting her directly. The evidence was damning enough that any reasonable person would struggle to explain it away. But something in her expression, a subtle shift around her eyes, warned me that Victoria was already operating from a position of knowledge I didn't yet possess. "Nothing urgent, just making sure we're on track for the quarter." "Good. Speaking of which, I've scheduled a meeting with our accountant for next week. We need to discuss some restructuring options that could significantly improve our tax position." Victoria's tone was casual, but her words sent a chill through me. "Restructuring? What kind of restructuring?" "Partnership adjustments, mostly. Ways to optimize our individual exposures and responsibilities. It's pretty standard stuff. Every successful firm goes through it eventually." She paused, studying my expression. "You trust me to handle the business side, right? Just like I trust you to handle the creative side." The question felt like a test. For 15 years, our division of labor had been clear, and I'd thought equitable. Victoria managed clients, contracts, and finances while I focused on design, project management, and team leadership. But now I realized that this arrangement had given her complete control over the information flow that determined our success or failure. "Of course I trust you," I said, the lie tasting bitter in my mouth. We're partners. Victoria's smile widened. Exactly, partners trust each other completely. After she left for a client meeting, I found myself staring at the closed folder on my desk. Elena's evidence was compelling, but it was also circumstantial. If I was going to confront Victoria, if I was going to protect everything we'd built, I needed more than suspicious financial transactions and client miscommunications. I needed to see her betrayal with my own eyes. The opportunity came 3 weeks later, during what Victoria called the most important partnership meeting of our careers. She'd been building anticipation for days, hinting at a major announcement that would transform our competitive position and secure our financial future. I arrived at the office that morning with a knot in my stomach that had nothing to do with anticipation and everything to do with dread. Elena had continued her investigation, uncovering additional evidence that painted an increasingly clear picture of systematic deception. But I still hadn't found the smoking gun, the undeniable proof that would force Victoria to admit what she was doing. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in our glass conference room, the space where we'd celebrated every major milestone in our partnership. Victoria had arranged for lunch to be catered, an unusual touch that suggested the significance of whatever she planned to announce. Before we begin, Victoria said, pulling up a presentation on her laptop, I want to acknowledge how far we've come together. 15 years ago, we were two graduate students with a shared vision. Today, Marshall and Ashford Architecture is one of the most respected firms in the Pacific Northwest. I nodded, wondering where this was leading. Victoria clicked to her first slide, Strategic Partnership Evolution. The market has changed dramatically in recent years, she continued. Clients expect larger-scale operations, faster turnaround times, and broader service capabilities than a boutique firm can provide. I've been quietly exploring options that would allow us to remain competitive while preserving the quality that defines our work. The next slide showed a flowchart with Marshall and Ashford at the center, connected to what appeared to be a network of partner firms and service providers. I've been in preliminary discussions with several firms about potential collaboration opportunities. Nothing formal yet, but the conversations have been very promising. Preliminary discussions. I thought about Elena's evidence about the diverted payments and redirected clients. Victoria had moved far beyond preliminary. What kind of collaborations? I asked. Resource sharing, primarily, joint project development, coordinated client services, possibly some administrative consolidation to reduce overhead. Victoria's tone was carefully neutral, but I could see the calculation behind her eyes. The goal would be to maintain our creative independence while benefiting from increased operational efficiency. She clicked to the next slide, and my blood turned to ice. It was an organizational chart showing the proposed structure of what she called the Northwest Design Collective. Marshall and Ashford appeared as one of 4 member firms, but our position in the hierarchy was unmistakably subordinate. At the top of the chart, Meridian Design Group, Managing Partner Preston Caldwell. This is just a conceptual framework, Victoria said quickly, noticing my expression. Nothing's been decided. I wanted to get your thoughts before moving forward with any formal discussions. Formal discussions. The email I'd accidentally seen flashed through my mind. Phase 3 implementation client migration complete by Q1 2025. Whatever was happening here had moved far beyond conceptual. Victoria, I need to take a closer look at this before we discuss it further. Can you send me the presentation? Of course, I'll email it to you this afternoon. She closed her laptop, but not before I noticed another browser tab open in the background, what looked like another email thread. Actually, could you send it now? I'd like to review it while the discussion is fresh in my mind. Victoria hesitated for just a moment, long enough for me to recognize the calculation happening behind her professional smile. Let me just pull it up again, she said, reopening her laptop. As she navigated back to the presentation, I caught a glimpse of the email thread that had been hidden behind it. The subject line was partially visible. Marshall Transition Timeline Urgent. My stomach dropped, but I forced my expression to remain neutral. Victoria clicked through to her email and attached the presentation to a new message, typing my address with the fluid motion of routine. There you go. Take all the time you need to review it. Thanks, I'll look it over tonight and we can discuss it tomorrow. Victoria stood to leave, gathering her materials with the efficient movements of someone who had other, more pressing meetings to attend. Victoria, one more thing. You mentioned these were preliminary discussions. How preliminary? She paused in the doorway, her body language shifting almost imperceptibly. Early stages. No commitments have been made. Another lie. After she left, I sat alone in the conference room, staring at the space where her laptop had been. The sun was setting behind the Seattle skyline, casting long shadows across the polished table where we'd signed our partnership agreement 15 years ago. How long had she been planning this? I thought about Preston Caldwell, about his easy charm and his interest in our industry trends at the holiday party. I thought about the clients who had mysteriously chosen other firms, about the projects that had disappeared from our pipeline without explanation. Phase 3 implementation. That meant there had been a Phase 1 and a Phase 2. How long had Victoria been executing a plan to dissolve our partnership? And more importantly, what was my position supposed to be when the transition was complete? The answer came sooner than I expected. 15 minutes later, Victoria returned to the conference room, claiming she'd forgotten her phone charger. But her laptop was already closed and packed away, and I'd seen her phone charger attached to the outlet by her desk when I'd passed her office earlier. She was checking to see if I was still there. "Still thinking it over?" she asked, her tone carefully casual. "It's a big decision. I want to make sure I understand all the implications." "Of course, take your time." She moved toward the outlet where her charger should have been, made a show of looking around, then shrugged. "I must have left it in my car." But as she turned to leave, I noticed she'd positioned herself where she could see her laptop screen's reflection in the conference room's glass walls. Her computer was still running, still connected to the office Wi-Fi. She was monitoring something. After Victoria left, again, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable 3 months earlier. I walked to her office, confirmed she had indeed gone to her car, and returned to the conference room. Her laptop was still there, still open, the screensaver having activated but not requiring a password to bypass. My hands were shaking as I touched the trackpad. The email application was still open, displaying the thread I'd glimpsed earlier. The subject line read, "Marshall Transition Timeline Urgent Phase 3 Authorization Required." I scrolled to the top of the conversation, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain Victoria would hear it from the parking garage. The thread began 6 months ago, long before Victoria's preliminary discussions, with an email from Preston Caldwell titled Partnership Dissolution Strategy. 6 months. The correspondence laid out a systematic plan to transfer Marshall and Ashford's most valuable assets to Meridian Design Group, while leaving me with the administrative responsibilities and financial liabilities. Phase 1 had involved redirecting new client inquiries to Meridian while maintaining the appearance of normal operations. Phase 2 had focused on completing existing projects while preventing new ones from reaching contract stage. Phase 3, the current phase, involved the formal dissolution of Marshall and Ashford, with Victoria joining Meridian as a senior partner and taking our client list with her. And my role in this transition. According to the emails, I was to be offered a position as a senior design consultant with Meridian, essentially a freelancer with no ownership stake, no partnership rights, and no control over the work I'd spent 15 years building. The final email in the thread, sent just 2 hours ago, contained a single line that made my vision blur with rage. "E. Marshall appears suspicious. Recommend accelerating timeline. Partnership dissolution documents prepared, awaiting your authorization to proceed." Partnership dissolution documents prepared. I grabbed my phone and took pictures of every email in the thread, my hands steadier now that shock had been replaced by cold, focused anger. Victoria wasn't just planning to betray our partnership. She was planning to do it in a way that would leave me with nothing while absolving herself of any legal responsibility. I closed the laptop and returned to my office, my mind racing through possibilities. The evidence I now possessed was damning, but Victoria had been careful. The dissolution strategy was couched in business language that could be defensible in court. She could claim the partnership had simply evolved beyond its original structure, that market forces had made consolidation necessary. But she'd made one crucial mistake. I opened our partnership agreement, The document Victoria and I had signed 15 years ago with such optimism and trust. We'd worked with a lawyer to craft language that would protect both of our interests, including a clause that had seemed unnecessary at the time. In the event that either partner engages in business activities that materially conflict with the interests of the partnership without the explicit written consent of the other partner, the non-conflicted partner may exercise sole discretion in determining the partnership's future, including the terms of any dissolution or restructuring. Victoria had been engaging in materially conflicting business activities for at least 6 months. The email thread provided timestamps, transaction details, and explicit evidence of intent to harm the partnership. She just handed me the keys to her own destruction. I spent the rest of the evening in my home workshop, surrounded by the tools and materials that had always helped me think clearly. My father had taught me to work with my hands when I was 8 years old, showing me how to shape wood and metal into something useful and beautiful. The thing about good materials, he'd said, guiding my small hands as I learned to use a chisel, is that they don't lie. Wood has grain, metal has strength, and stone has character. If you try to force them to be something they're not, they'll break. But if you understand their nature and work with it, you can create something that lasts forever. Victoria had been trying to force our partnership to be something it wasn't. But I understood its nature now. I understood the legal framework that governed our relationship, the financial structures that supported our operations, and the evidence that documented her betrayal. It was time to create something that would last. The next morning, I arrived at the office with a plan that Victoria would never see coming. She'd spent months orchestrating a complex scheme to steal our partnership, but she'd underestimated the very thing that had made our firm successful: my attention to detail and my respect for the structures that hold complex systems together. Elena was waiting in my office with a cup of coffee and an expression that told me she'd been doing her own investigative work. "I know you've been looking into the financial irregularities," I said, closing the door behind me. "What I'm about to show you goes far beyond that." I pulled up the photos I'd taken of Victoria's email thread, watching Elena's expression shift from concern to disbelief to cold anger as she processed what she was seeing. "6 months," she said finally. "She's been planning this for 6 months. At minimum, the first email references earlier conversations, so it could be longer." I sat down across from her, feeling calmer than I had in weeks. "Elena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." She nodded. "If you had a choice between staying with Marshall and Ashford as an independent firm or moving to Meridian Design Group as part of their acquisition of our assets, what would you choose?" Elena's answer was immediate. "Marshall and Ashford, without question. This firm isn't just a job for me, Ethan. It's been my professional home for 8 years. The work we do here, the way we treat our clients and our team, it matters." That was what I needed to hear. "Then I need your help with something that could be risky for both of us." Over the next hour, I laid out my plan. It was complex, requiring careful timing and absolute discretion, but it had one crucial advantage: it was completely legal. Unlike Victoria's scheme, which relied on deception and breach of contract, my approach would use the partnership agreement's own provisions to protect the firm's interests. The first step was documentation. Elena would continue her financial investigation, but now we'd be looking for evidence that could be presented in legal proceedings. Every redirected payment, every mysteriously canceled project, every client communication that had been altered or suppressed. The second step was legal consultation. I needed to understand exactly what remedies the partnership agreement provided and how to exercise them effectively. The third step was client contact. If Victoria was systematically misleading our clients about our availability and capabilities, they deserved to know the truth. "What about Victoria?" Elena asked. "She's going to notice if we start contacting clients directly." "Let her notice. She's been operating under the assumption that I'm either too trusting or too passive to challenge her. It's time to change that assumption." Elena smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in weeks. "What do you need me to do first?" "Start with the Riverside Mall project. Contact them directly and find out exactly what happened with our proposal. If Meridian Design Group stole our concepts, I want documentation." "Already on it," Elena said, pulling out her phone. "I've been building a relationship with their project manager for months. She trusts me. While Alina made her calls, I reached out to David Chen, the lawyer who'd helped us draft our partnership agreement 15 years ago. David's firm specialized in business partnerships and had guided several of our colleagues through similar challenges. Ethan, good to hear from you. How's the firm doing? That's actually why I'm calling, David. I need to schedule an urgent consultation about the partnership agreement you helped us draft. It's regarding the conflict of interest provisions. There was a pause. Are you and Victoria having disagreements about business direction? It's more serious than that. I have evidence that one partner has been engaging in activities that materially conflict with the partnership's interests. I need to understand my options. How urgent is urgent? I need to see you today if possible. David cleared his schedule for a 4 p.m. meeting. In the meantime, Alina had made contact with the Riverside Mall project manager, and the conversation had been enlightening. They never saw our revised proposal, Alina reported. Victoria contacted them 2 days after you submitted it to her and said we were withdrawing due to capacity constraints. But here's the interesting part. Meridian Design Group submitted their proposal the same day Victoria called to withdraw ours. Same day. That level of coordination couldn't be coincidental. Did they say anything about the similarity between our initial proposal and Meridian's winning design? Alina's expression was grim. They assumed we'd shared our concepts as part of some kind of industry collaboration. The project manager specifically mentioned how impressed they were that Meridian had incorporated several innovative elements that were remarkably similar to our initial approach. Intellectual property theft. That added another dimension to Victoria's betrayal, one that could have serious legal ramifications for both her and Preston Caldwell. I spent my lunch hour walking through Pike Place Market, trying to process the magnitude of what Victoria had done. This wasn't just about money or partnership control. She'd stolen creative work, the architectural concepts that represented months of research, innovation, and problem-solving. In our industry, intellectual property was often the difference between success and failure, between winning prestigious projects and being relegated to routine commercial work. She'd stolen my creativity and sold it to her lover. The thought hit me with unexpected force. The email thread had made it clear that Victoria and Preston's relationship went beyond business collaboration. There had been an intimacy in their communication, a shared excitement about building something together that felt like a mockery of everything Victoria and I had created. Had our entire partnership been a lie? David Chen's office occupied the corner of a downtown high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of Elliott Bay. I'd always admired the space. It projected exactly the kind of professional competence and understated power that successful legal practices required. Ethan, you look like a man carrying the weight of the world. Tell me what's happening. I handed him printed copies of the email thread, along with Alina's financial documentation and a summary of the client communication irregularities. David reviewed the materials with the methodical attention that had made him one of Seattle's most respected business attorneys. This is extensive, he said after 20 minutes of silent reading. How long has this been going on? At least 6 months that I can prove, possibly longer. David turned to our partnership agreement, flipping to the sections that dealt with conflict of interest and partnership dissolution. The good news is that you have a very strong case. The conflict of interest clause is unusually comprehensive, and the evidence you've gathered clearly establishes material breach. He paused, looking up from the documents. The less good news is that Victoria has been planning for this moment. Her approach to partnership dissolution is legally defensible, even if it's ethically questionable. What does that mean for my options? It means you have the legal right to exercise sole discretion over the partnership's future, but you need to be strategic about how you do it. Victoria has positioned herself to claim that market forces made consolidation necessary. You need to position yourself to demonstrate that her actions were driven by personal gain rather than business necessity. David walked me through the specific provisions of our agreement, explaining how the conflict of interest clause could be invoked and what remedies it provided. The language was complex, but the basic principle was straightforward. If one partner acted against the partnership's interests, the other partner could assume control of the business and determine the terms of any restructuring. The key is timing, David explained. You need to invoke the clause before Victoria initiates formal dissolution proceedings. Once she files the paperwork, the process becomes more complex and expensive. How long do I have? Based on her email communications, probably not long. I'd recommend acting within the next 2 weeks. I left David's office with a clear understanding of my legal position and a detailed timeline for exercising my rights under the partnership agreement. But I also left with a deeper understanding of what this process would cost, not just financially, but emotionally and professionally. Victoria and I were about to destroy 15 years of partnership in a battle that would define the rest of our careers. That evening, I called my father. Frank Marshall was 78 years old, a retired carpenter whose hands still bore the calluses and scars of 5 decades working with tools and materials. He'd built our family's first home with his own hands, raised 3 children through economic ups and downs, and somehow managed to maintain an optimism about human nature that I'd always envied. "Dad, I need some advice about a business situation." Business advice from an old carpenter? You must be desperate. I told him about Victoria's betrayal, about the months of deception and the systematic theft of our clients and creative work. I told him about the partnership agreement and the legal remedies available to me. "Son, it sounds like you know what needs to be done. What are you really asking me?" "I guess I'm asking whether fighting for this is worth it, whether trying to save the partnership is worth the cost." There was a long pause. When my father spoke again, his voice carried the weight of decades of hard-won wisdom. "Ethan, I've seen a lot of partnerships fail over the years. Business partnerships, marriages, friendships, they all break down the same way. One person decides they deserve more than what they agreed to, and they start taking it without asking." He paused, and I could hear him settling into his favorite chair, the one by the window where he liked to watch the birds in his backyard. "The question isn't whether fighting is worth it. The question is whether you can live with yourself if you don't fight. You've got employees depending on you, clients who trust you, and 15 years of good work that means something. Sometimes a man has to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." "Especially when it's hard." "Thanks, Dad. I think I know what I need to do." "I think you've always known, son. You just needed permission to do it." The next morning, I arrived at the office with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. Elena was already at her desk, having come in early to finalize the client documentation we'd been gathering. Marcus Webb, our junior architect, was hunched over his computer in the corner, working on renderings for a project that might not exist much longer if Victoria's plan succeeded. It was time to change that narrative. I called an emergency partnership meeting for 10 a.m., giving Victoria just enough notice to attend, but not enough time to prepare for what was coming. When she arrived in the conference room, she brought her laptop and a folder of documents, probably the partnership dissolution paperwork that Preston's email had referenced. "Good morning, Victoria. Thank you for making time on short notice." "Of course, what's on your mind?" Her tone was professional but cautious. Something in my demeanor must have signaled that this wasn't going to be a routine discussion. I placed a printed copy of our partnership agreement on the table between us, open to the conflict of interest provisions. "I want to discuss Section 7.3 of our partnership agreement, the clause dealing with material conflicts of interest." Victoria's expression didn't change, but I noticed her grip tighten almost imperceptibly on her laptop case. "What about it?" "I have evidence that you've been engaging in business activities that materially conflict with the interests of our partnership, without my knowledge or consent, for at least 6 months. I placed printouts of the email thread on the table, watching Victoria's face as she recognized her own correspondence with Preston Caldwell. These emails detail a systematic plan to transfer Marshall and Ashford's clients and assets to Meridian Design Group, while leaving me with the administrative liabilities and no ownership stake in the work we've built together. Victoria's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something I'd never seen before, calculation mixed with panic. "Ethan, I think you're misunderstanding what you're seeing here. These were preliminary discussions about potential collaboration opportunities." "Stop." My voice was quieter than I'd expected, but it carried enough authority to interrupt her prepared explanation. "I've documented 6 major projects where you redirected clients to Meridian without my knowledge. I have evidence of payments diverted to accounts I've never seen." I have testimony from clients who were told we were withdrawing from projects I never agreed to abandon. I opened Elena's financial report and spread it across the table. The Henderson Industries payment, $340,000 that was deposited into an account controlled by a shell company you created 6 months ago. The Riverside Mall expansion, a project where our creative concepts were stolen and sold to Meridian the same day you told the client we were withdrawing. Victoria leaned back in her chair, her expression shifting from denial to assessment. She was evaluating her options, calculating whether she could still control the narrative. "You've been monitoring my email," she said finally. "That's a violation of privacy laws. Your laptop was open in our shared conference room, displaying correspondence about dissolving our partnership without my consent. I think any reasonable person would consider that a forfeitable expectation of privacy." David Chen had prepared me for this response. "Victoria, according to these emails, you've been planning to dissolve Marshall and Ashford for months while pretending to be my partner. You've stolen client relationships, intellectual property, and financial assets. You've actively worked to undermine the business we built together." I slid a formal notice across the table, a document David had helped me prepare the night before. "Under Section 7.3 of our partnership agreement, I'm hereby invoking my right to assume sole discretion over the partnership's future. Effective immediately, you're suspended from all business development activities pending resolution of these conflicts." Victoria picked up the notice, scanning it with the rapid eye movements of someone reading legal language they'd hoped never to see. "You can't do this, Ethan. I have rights under this partnership, too. You forfeited those rights when you decided to steal our business." I kept my voice level professional. "But you do have options. We can work out a fair separation agreement that acknowledges your contributions to the firm while compensating the partnership for the damage you've caused. Or we can let lawyers sort it out in court." Victoria set down the notice and opened her laptop. For a moment, I thought she might be preparing to negotiate. Instead, she pulled up what appeared to be a pre-written email. "I've been preparing for this possibility," she said, her finger hovering over the send button. "This email goes to every client we've worked with in the past 5 years, explaining that Marshall and Ashford is experiencing internal conflicts that make it impossible to guarantee project completion. It also recommends that they consider transferring their business to more stable firms." She was threatening to destroy our reputation if I didn't let her steal our business. "Send it," I said. Victoria's finger froze. "What?" "Send the email, Victoria. Let our clients know that one partner has been systematically stealing from the business, while the other partner has been working to protect their interests. I think they'll find that distinction meaningful." I pulled out my phone and showed her a draft email of my own, one I'd prepared with Elena's help the night before. "This goes to the same client list, explaining exactly what's been happening and providing documentation of your activities. It includes bank records showing diverted payments, emails proving client deception, and testimony from project managers about stolen intellectual property. Two could play at the scorched earth game." "You'll destroy both of our reputations," Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. "No, Victoria, you'll destroy your reputation. I'll preserve mine by telling the truth." For the first time since I'd known her, Victoria looked genuinely uncertain. She'd built her strategy around the assumption that I would prioritize avoiding conflict over protecting our business. She'd never considered that I might be willing to fight for what we'd built. "What do you want?" she asked finally. "I want you to stop stealing from our partnership. I want our client relationships returned to Marshall and Ashford. I want the financial assets you've diverted returned to our operating accounts." I paused, letting the weight of the demands settle. "And I want you to decide whether you want to rebuild our partnership on honest terms or whether you'd prefer to leave and start fresh somewhere else." Victoria closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, studying my face as if seeing me for the first time. "You've changed," she said. "No, Victoria. I've just stopped pretending that betrayal is a form of business strategy." The negotiation that followed took place over 3 days, mediated by David Chen and Victoria's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Torres who specialized in partnership dissolutions. What emerged was a settlement that neither of us loved but both of us could live with. Victoria would resign from Marshall and Ashford, effective immediately, in exchange for a buyout payment calculated at 75% of her theoretical partnership value, a discount that reflected the damage her actions had caused to the business. The diverted client payments would be returned to the firm's operating accounts, along with documentation of all client communications and project materials. More importantly, Victoria would be prohibited from using any Marshall and Ashford intellectual property, client relationships, or business methods for a period of 2 years. Any work she'd shared with Meridian Design Group would have to be returned or properly licensed, with compensation paid to Marshall and Ashford for its use. The Riverside Mall expansion project presented a special case. Since Meridian had already won the contract using stolen concepts, Victoria would be personally liable for intellectual property damages, a sum that significantly reduced her buyout payment and sent a clear message to Preston Caldwell about the costs of corporate espionage. "This isn't how I wanted things to end," Victoria said as we signed the final documents in David's office. "How did you want them to end?" I asked. She was quiet for a long moment, staring out at Elliott Bay, where ferries moved slowly between the islands. "I wanted us to be bigger than we were, more successful, more influential. I thought if I could engineer a merger with Meridian, we could become a major player in the regional market." "And you thought the best way to do that was to lie to me for 6 months. I thought you'd resist the idea if I presented it directly. You've always been cautious about growth, protective of our independence." Victoria turned to look at me directly. I was probably right about that. She was probably right, but that didn't justify her methods. "Victoria, if you'd come to me 6 months ago with a proposal to explore merger opportunities, I would have listened. I might not have agreed, but I would have respected your right to advocate for your vision of our future." "Would you really have considered it?" I thought about the question honestly. "I don't know, but I would have given you the chance to convince me. That's what partners do." Victoria nodded slowly. "I'm sorry, Ethan. For what it's worth, I never intended for things to get this complicated." "What did you intend?" "I intended to create something magnificent, a firm that could tackle the biggest projects in the region, that could influence urban development and environmental policy." She paused. "I intended to do it with you as my partner, not despite you." But somewhere along the way, her vision had become more important than our partnership. The legal proceedings concluded on a Friday afternoon in late November. Elena had prepared a celebration dinner at a small restaurant in Fremont, inviting the entire Marshall and Ashford team, all 8 employees who had chosen to stay with the firm rather than follow Victoria to whatever venture she pursued next. Marcus Webb raised his glass of wine and offered a toast that surprised me with its insight. "To Ethan, for showing us that integrity isn't just about doing the right thing when it's easy. It's about doing the right thing when it costs you everything you thought you wanted." Everything I thought I wanted. As I looked around the table at Elena, Marcus, and the rest of our team, I realized that wasn't quite accurate. Victoria's betrayal had cost me a partnership, but it had revealed something more valuable: the knowledge that Marshall and Ashford was more than just a business arrangement between 2 people. It was a community of people who believed in creating spaces that served human needs, who valued craftsmanship over profit margins, who understood that sustainable success required trust and mutual respect. Those were the values worth fighting for. 6 months after Victoria's departure, Marshall and Ashford architecture had not only survived, it had thrived. The client relationships I'd fought to preserve had deepened into long-term partnerships. The Belmont Community Center project, which Victoria had tried to redirect to Meridian, became the firm's most celebrated work, winning a regional design award and generating 3 additional community projects. Elena accepted a promotion to junior partner, bringing fresh energy and ideas to the business development role Victoria had abandoned. Marcus Webb's design skills flourished without the competitive pressure Victoria had created, and his innovative approaches to sustainable architecture attracted attention from environmental organizations throughout the Pacific Northwest. I also hired Sarah Chen, the former client who had helped expose Victoria's deceptions. Sarah brought extensive experience in project management and client relations, along with a deep understanding of how trust operates in professional relationships. "People don't just hire architects," she explained during her first week at the firm. They hire the confidence that their vision will be understood and respected. Victoria never understood that. She thought clients were problems to be solved rather than partners to be served. Sarah was right. The client relationships we'd rebuilt were stronger than before because they were based on transparency rather than manipulation. When problems arose, and they always did in complex projects, our clients trusted us to find solutions that served their interests rather than our convenience. The legal settlement with Victoria had also provided an unexpected benefit. The documentation process had forced us to systematize our client communication, project management, and financial controls in ways that made the firm more efficient and accountable. Elena joked that Victoria had inadvertently given us the best business consultation we'd ever received. Preston Caldwell's Meridian Design Group faced its own reckoning. The intellectual property lawsuit forced them to return several stolen concepts and pay damages that significantly impacted their profitability. More importantly, word of their business practices spread through the architectural community, making it difficult for them to attract top talent or establish partnerships with ethical firms. Victoria herself had joined a large corporate firm in Portland, where her skills in business development could be channeled into legitimate growth strategies. We'd had no direct contact since the settlement, but mutual colleagues reported that she seemed to be thriving in an environment where competition was open rather than covert. I hoped she'd learned something from our experience. On a quiet Thursday evening in early spring, I was working late in the office, reviewing plans for a new affordable housing project, when I found myself thinking about the partnership Victoria and I had once shared. The anger and betrayal had faded, replaced by something more complex, sadness for what might have been, coupled with gratitude for what had been preserved. The conference room where she'd presented her strategic partnership evolution now hosted weekly team meetings where every voice was heard and every decision was made transparently. The glass walls that had once symbolized Victoria's surveillance now represented our commitment to open communication. We'd taken something broken and made it beautiful. My phone buzzed with a text message from my father. Saw the article about your community center project in the paper. Proud of you, son. Sometimes standing up for what's right leads to something better than what you thought you wanted. Sometimes it did. As I packed up my drawings and prepared to head home, I walked through the office one last time, checking that everything was secure. In the main workspace, Marcus's computer screen displayed a rendering of our latest project, a library renovation that would transform a forgotten building into a vibrant community resource. Elena's desk held a stack of contracts for new projects, each one representing a client who had chosen Marshall and Ashford because of our reputation for integrity and innovation. Sarah's workspace showed evidence of her systematic approach to client communication, color-coded files, detailed timelines, and handwritten notes that demonstrated her commitment to understanding each project's unique requirements. This was what Victoria had tried to steal. Not just the client list or the financial assets, but the culture of craftsmanship and collaboration that made our work meaningful. She'd seen Marshall and Ashford as a commodity to be leveraged for personal gain. But it was actually something much more valuable, a community of people committed to creating spaces that served human needs. That community couldn't be bought, sold, or stolen. As I locked the office and walked to my car, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with preservation. We'd saved something worth saving. We'd protected something worth protecting. And we'd learned that the strongest foundations are built on trust, transparency, and shared commitment to something larger than individual ambition. The Seattle skyline stretched out before me, dotted with buildings that represented decades of architectural vision and craftsmanship. Somewhere among those structures were projects that Marshall and Ashford had contributed to, spaces where people lived, worked, learned, and gathered. That was our legacy. Not the business battles or legal victories, but the physical manifestation of our belief that good design could improve people's lives. Victoria had tried to reduce that legacy to a transaction, but she'd failed to understand its true nature. Some things are worth more than money. As I drove home through the quiet streets of Queen Anne, past the craftsman houses and corner cafes that gave the neighborhood its character, I thought about the workshop waiting for me, the space where I'd learned to work with materials that didn't lie, that responded to skill and patience rather than manipulation. Tomorrow, I'd return to the office and continue the work of building something lasting. Not just buildings, but relationships. Not just business success, but professional integrity. Victoria had taught me something valuable after all. She'd shown me the difference between growing a business and growing as a person, between achieving success and earning it, between taking what you want and creating what the world needs. I was grateful for the lesson, even if it had come at such a high cost. The partnership agreement we'd signed 15 years ago had included language about creating something that would outlive us both. Victoria had interpreted that as building a business empire. I'd learned to interpret it as building a legacy of work that served human needs and professional relationships based on mutual respect. In the end, only one of those interpretations had proven sustainable. As I pulled into my driveway and saw the warm light from my workshop window, I smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new projects, new opportunities to create something beautiful and functional. And I'd face them with a team I could trust, in a business built on values I could defend. Victoria had tried to steal my partnership, but she'd inadvertently helped me discover something more valuable: the knowledge that integrity wasn't just a business strategy, but a way of life that made success meaningful rather than simply profitable. That was worth fighting for. That was worth everything. The line between revenge and justice is thin. Did they cross it? Share your view, like the video, subscribe, and pass this story to someone who'll think too.